Some moments change your life because someone believes in you. Others change your life because someone doesn't. For Ethan Brooks, it started with a crumpled $50 bill sliding across the polished floor of a private airport hangar in Colorado. The woman who tossed it never expected to see him again. She certainly never expected to bet $5 million that he couldn't do what every certified aviation technician in the building had already failed to accomplish. But pride has a funny way of hiding the truth. And kindness has an even stranger way of revealing it. Every morning at 5:30, Ethan Brooks packed 2 lunches. One was for himself. The other was for his 9-year-old daughter, Lily. Since losing his wife to cancer 4 years earlier, mornings had become a carefully choreographed routine. Wake Lily. Cook oatmeal. Check homework. Brush tangled hair. Walk her to the neighbor's house before heading to work. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Ethan owned Brooks Auto Repair, a small garage just outside Colorado Springs. The faded sign had been hanging over the shop for nearly 30 years, first under his father's ownership, then his own. Most customers knew him as the mechanic who never charged for things people didn't need. If tightening one bolt fixes it, he'd often say, "I'm not replacing the whole engine." That philosophy made loyal customers. It did not make him rich. Still, every Friday evening, Ethan closed the garage early enough to attend Lily's soccer games. Every birthday featured homemade decorations. Every Christmas morning felt magical, even if the gifts came from discount stores. Their little house echoed with laughter more often than sadness. And Ethan considered himself fortunate. One windy Tuesday afternoon, a call arrived from the regional airport. Not the commercial terminal. The executive aviation hangars. The manager sounded desperate. "Every aviation mechanic we've called is tied up with inspections. One of our fuel trucks won't start. We need it running before sunset." "I'm an auto mechanic," Ethan replied. "I know. But it's basically a diesel engine. Can you at least take a look?" Ethan glanced at the nearly empty garage. "Be there in 20. The private aviation terminal looked like another world. Luxury SUVs. Polished marble floors. Glass offices overlooking million-dollar aircraft. People wearing tailored suits hurried through the building carrying laptops instead of toolboxes. Ethan stepped out of his aging pickup truck wearing grease-stained work boots. Several employees barely noticed him. Others assumed he was delivering supplies. He simply smiled. The stranded fuel truck sat near an enormous silver private jet. Within 15 minutes, Ethan diagnosed the problem. Not the fuel system. Not the starter. A damaged ground cable hidden beneath corrosion. He cleaned the connection, replaced the cable from spare materials inside his truck, and the engine roared to life. Airport workers applauded. The manager shook Ethan's hand. "You just saved tonight's departures." As Ethan packed his tools, an elegant woman in a charcoal business suit approached. She carried herself with absolute confidence. Sharp eyes. Perfect posture. The unmistakable presence of someone accustomed to giving orders. Her name was Victoria Langford. Founder and CEO of one of the country's fastest-growing technology companies. She had built a billion-dollar business before turning 45. She was respected. Admired. And, according to many employees, terrifying. Victoria glanced at Ethan's truck. Then at his worn uniform. "You fixed the fuel truck?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." She pulled a crisp $50 bill from her wallet and flicked it toward him. It fluttered through the air before landing near his boots. "Buy yourself a decent lunch." The hangar grew quiet. No one spoke. Ethan stared at the bill. He could have walked away. He could have argued. Instead, he slowly picked it up. Folded it carefully. Walked over to Victoria. "I appreciate generosity," he said calmly. "But payment means more when it's offered with respect." He gently placed the $50 bill back into her hand. Then returned to his toolbox. Several employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. Victoria frowned. No one had ever refused her money before. Minutes later, another problem emerged. Her Gulfstream business jet refused to power its auxiliary systems. Without them, the aircraft couldn't legally depart. The chief aviation mechanic had already spent hours troubleshooting. Additional specialists joined him. Nothing worked. Victoria checked her watch repeatedly. She was due in New York for negotiations that could determine the future of her company. Every passing minute cost money. Finally, frustration boiled over. She looked toward Ethan, who was preparing to leave. "You." He turned. "You fix machines. I repair cars. A machine is a machine." The principles overlap, Ethan admitted. But aircraft require certified maintenance. One executive laughed. "He couldn't fix the jet if we gave him a month." Victoria crossed her arms. "What if I said you couldn't solve it?" Ethan shrugged. "Then I'd probably agree." Her eyebrows lifted. "No ego? My daughter reminds me every day that I don't know everything." A few people chuckled. Victoria smiled for the first time. Then her competitive instincts took over. "I'll make you a bet." The room became silent again. "If you identify the problem before my aviation team does, I'll donate $5 million to any children's charity you choose." Gasps echoed across the hangar. "But," she continued, "if you fail, you accept the $50. The employees looked at Ethan. He looked at Victoria. "I don't gamble. It's for charity." He paused. Finally nodded. "Only if everyone remembers this isn't about proving who's smarter." The certified technicians reluctantly agreed to let Ethan observe. He never touched a single aviation control. Instead, he simply watched. Listened. Asked questions. What changed before the failure? When was the last maintenance? Any unusual smells? What happened immediately beforehand? Most ignored him. One older aviation mechanic named Carlos answered patiently. "We replaced a cabin entertainment module." "Only that?" Carlos nodded. Ethan smiled slightly. "Mind if I see the removed panel?" The wiring looked immaculate. Too immaculate. Something bothered him. Years of diagnosing cars had taught him one simple lesson. The newest part isn't always the faulty one. Sometimes it's what changed around it. He noticed tiny scratches near one connector. Someone had forced it into place. Not enough to damage the connector. Just enough to slightly bend a neighboring grounding pin. He pointed. Carlos leaned closer. His eyes widened. "No way." Using approved aviation procedures, Carlos corrected the alignment. Power returned instantly. Lights illuminated throughout the aircraft. Systems rebooted. The jet came alive. The hangar erupted in applause. Even the skeptical executives joined in. Victoria stood completely still. She wasn't embarrassed because Ethan had solved the mystery. She was embarrassed because she finally realized what had happened hours earlier. She hadn't seen a skilled professional. She had seen worn boots. Greasy sleeves. An old pickup truck. And she judged everything else from there. The following morning, headlines weren't about the repaired aircraft. They were about something else entirely. Victoria Langford announced a $5 million donation to children's education and family support programs across Colorado. During the press conference, reporters asked why. She surprised everyone. "I made an assumption based on appearances," she admitted. A man showed me more professionalism after being insulted than I showed after decades of business success. She turned toward Ethan. Thank you for reminding me that dignity isn't measured by income. The room applauded. But Ethan looked uncomfortable. I didn't come here to teach lessons. Victoria smiled. Maybe that's why you did. Weeks later, Victoria visited Brooks Auto Repair. No television cameras. No reporters. No publicity team. Just her. She noticed something immediately. A handwritten notebook beside the register. What is this? Ethan looked up from changing brake pads. My community account. She flipped through the pages. Every few entries read. Paid anonymously. Single mother. Retired veteran. College student. Widower. People unable to afford repairs had quietly received help from strangers. Sometimes Ethan. Sometimes other customers. Sometimes both. You never advertise this? He shook his head. If people know they're helping someone specific, they often want recognition. And if nobody knows? They help because it's right. Victoria closed the notebook slowly. You've been building kindness without anyone noticing. I've been fixing cars. She laughed. No. She looked around the garage. You've been fixing trust. That conversation planted an idea neither of them expected. 6 months later, they launched the Brooks Mobility Foundation. Not a charity that handed out cars. Not flashy giveaways. Instead, certified mechanics across the state volunteered one Saturday each month. Teachers. Nurses. Single parents. Caregivers. Veterans. Families facing temporary hardship. Anyone whose transportation problems threatened their ability to work could receive honest inspections and free repairs. Local businesses donated parts. Retired mechanics donated time. High school vocational students learned alongside experienced professionals. Communities that had rarely spoken to one another suddenly worked side by side. One repaired alternator at a time. Lily loved those Saturdays most. She greeted every volunteer with homemade cookies. She organized donated books for waiting children. She even created colorful thank you cards for every mechanic. One afternoon she asked Victoria a question. Were you always nice? Victoria laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. No. What changed? Victoria glanced across the garage. Ethan was patiently explaining an engine problem to a nervous young driver. He reminded me that confidence without humility becomes arrogance. Lily nodded thoughtfully. My dad says everyone needs someone to believe in them. Victoria smiled. Your dad is wiser than most CEOs. Years later, people still remembered the famous $5 million bet. Not because of the money. Not because of the private jet. Not because a mechanic solved an unusual problem. They remembered it because something much rarer had happened. Someone powerful admitted she had been wrong. Someone overlooked refused to become bitter. And instead of walking away angry, both chose to build something that helped thousands of families. That's the part worth remembering. Because kindness isn't pretending disrespect never happened. Kindness is deciding that the story doesn't have to end there. Every single day, we meet people whose lives we know almost nothing about. The cashier working 2 jobs. The janitor caring for an aging parent. The delivery driver rushing to make it home before bedtime. The mechanic with grease on his hands and hope in his heart. Respect costs nothing. Yet it may be the most valuable gift we ever offer another human being. As for the $50 bill, it never went back into Victoria's wallet. She framed it. It hangs today inside the Brooks Mobility Foundation workshop beneath a simple handwritten note. Never underestimate a person because of what you see on the outside. Character is always working beneath the surface. And every new volunteer who walks through those garage doors pauses long enough to read it. Not because $50 changed anyone's life, but because one moment of humility changed countless others.